Sonnet 43 by Elizabeth Barrett Browning, written by Mumtaz Abdullahi Muhammad. So, firstly, let's begin with a biography. So, who really was Elizabeth Barrett Browning? Firstly, let's look at some images of her. So, Elizabeth Barrett Browning was a famous English poet of the Victorian era, born in 1806 in Durham, England. From a very young age, she displayed a passion for literature and started writing her first poetry piece at age 12. So, she was also considered a child prodigy of her time. Although she struggled with chronic illnesses for the majority of her life, scholars now say that it was HKPP, which is essentially a muscle weakening disorder. She gained recognition for her bold themes and how deeply emotion was expressed through her literature. Many of her works were inspired by Robert Browning, with whom she had a secret love affair and eventually got married. So essentially, she had a secret romance with him, and she actually fell in love with him through letters. So the reason why they had to elope in secret was because Elizabeth's father disapproved of any of his children getting married. So this also includes the sonnets and sonnets from the Portuguese, where Sonnet 43 also comes from, which is what I'm writing this presentation about. She broke down barriers for women in literature and left a lasting legacy in poetry. So basically, she also advocated for social justice. You may be wondering what, for example, right? So she used her poetry to speak out against things like child labor, slavery, and oppression of women, which is extremely rare for women writers of her time. So let's continue. Let's talk about the genre and literary era. So, Sonnet 43 belongs to the lyric poetry genre and follows the form of a Petrarchan sonnet. What is that, you may ask? So basically, it's a 14-line poem which essentially is divided into an octave, which is 8 lines, and a sestet, which is 6 lines, which total up to a 14-line poem. It was written during the Victorian period, so this was a time when literature often explored concepts of personal connections to love, faith, emotions, morality, and even ethics. So her work fits well within this era's framework and focuses on unique individual experiences, especially on romantic and spiritual love. This sonnet reflects other poems of the Victorian era that blend personal feelings with structured poetic form. So now let's speak about the summary of Sonnet 44. So what was it talking about in conclusion? So you can see some images of Sonnet 43. So in summary, Sonnet 43 explores the deep love that Elizabeth had for her husband, Robert Browning. So it was actually part of a secret love story. Sonnet 43 comes from her collection, Sonnets from the Portuguese, which she originally pretended were translation of foreign poems, but actually were poems written for her husband, Robert Browning. But it's not also Portuguese as well. The title is Poetic Disguise because Robert used to call her My Little Portuguese, like as a pet name, because of her darker complexion. And she used that nicknames to make the title feel more private and have a connection between just her and him. And as well, it was never meant for the public. She was so shy about showing her personal feelings, and she only actually agreed to publish the sonnets because Robert insisted they were that good. And we do appreciate those writings still today. So she uses a wide variety of comparisons to express just how deeply she cares for her husband, from simple moments of everyday life to her spiritual beliefs. Example is, I love thee to the depth and breadth and height of my soul can reach. The speaker declares her eternal and powerful love which knows no boundaries. Essentially, she stated that she will love him even after death, even after, obviously, they pass away. So this poem builds upon her intense emotion and sense of everlasting devotion for her husband, Robert Browning. So now, let's speak about the literary elements that we can see throughout. So, let's look at some images. Basically, essentially, all these images are Sonnet 43. So what makes Sonnet 43 so unique and stand out compared to other poetry in that era is how rich its imagery was, the strong emotional tone, and continuous use of repetition. So the phrase I love thee gives the poem a more passionate and rhythmic feel. So the repetition is able to leave a lasting impression in the reader's mind. So she also liked using metaphors and abstract comparisons, like I love thee with the breath, smiles, tears of all my life. So this describes how her love encompasses every aspect of her physical being, as well as it being an intangible concept, with its being intertwined to her very existence. So the structure of the sonnet has a smooth flow and resolution. So it helps it feel much more grounded and allows it to be a timeless piece. So basically, we can see in the structure that it has something called a volta, which is a turn, right? So basically, after the turn, it reflects on how that love is both enduring and spiritual. So it creates a transition that gives the poem a sense of depth, you can say. So now let's speak about what personal connection do I have to Sonnet 43 and why did I choose it as essentially my favorite reading selection out of all the options. So it really stood out to me because of how deeply it captured the deep feeling of love, and in the process, the poem actually captured my heart. Although it was written over 100 years ago, I still resonated with it today and relate to it, making it a really timeless poem. I connected with her description of loving someone in both ordinary and extraordinary ways, essentially in this world and the next, and how strong of an emotion love really is and can be. She reminded me how beautifully words of love and affirmation could really be, and I appreciated that. So, my favorite quote is I love thee with the passion put to use in my old griefs, right? So, basically, essentially shows her development as a person as she kind of essentially turns her negative emotions into positive ones. So, I really resonated with that. Thank you for listening, and this is the end.